What's happening, people? It's Casey at your inconvenience from the Barbershop Politics podcast. You need to start following, subscribing to all our media outlets. It's BSP Podcast on all platforms, so you'll be able to find us on everything. Um, if you want to listen and hear more of what we've got to say on this beautiful platform that we are providing to you lot. I also want to say shout out to my colleague King OP the Great, who's already put a breakdown up on YouTube explaining his side and his perspective and his take on things. He even went into a couple of the stateside's action about the Golovkin fight that also took place on the May 5th. But as for me, I'm not going to even venture off into that realm for this take, because I just feel like that fight was an exhibition fight, and not that it's any fault of GG Triple G, but it just was a very, you knew what was gonna happen from the minute they even decided to draw a poster for the fight. You knew exactly how it was going to end. So that's all I have to say on that matter for now anyway. But I do want to get heavily involved into the May 5th revenge or repeat bout between Tony Bellew and David Haye. Great spectacle. Lived up to the hype somewhat, I would say. No injuries, so already a better fight than the first fight. And for me, looking back now, because it's been a couple of days and I've watched the fight back a couple of times as well, I've realised that there's no way you can talk about the second fight without talking about the first fight. There's actually a very special relationship between the two. There's a very special relationship between the two fights. And, there's a lot of contrast and a lot of things that you can take from the first fight, which would have told you the story for the second fight. First off, David Haye had a lot to say, like shitloads to say about how it was a mismatch. He was going to take Tony to hospital. He was going to, end his career, knock 7 senses out of his brain. All sorts of vicious threats were made in that first fight. And he was really on form. He attacked Eddie and said Eddie doesn't care about his fighters. Like, why is Eddie putting him in the ring? And I think a lot of people probably out there probably said to themselves that, yeah, this was a mismatch. This shouldn't be allowed. Tony Bellew could get seriously hurt. They probably didn't have him winning. He was a massive underdog in the first fight, Tony Bellew. And, this time around, David Haye had, I kind of disagree with O on this front, that O said that he probably took the better approach by not saying anything. But for me, I kind of believe that the writing was on the wall. It kind of tells me that he probably knew that I probably can't talk as much this time because there's probably a chance that I'm going to lose. Hence why the whole retreating and being reserved and trying to be calm and not biting didn't really sell for me. I didn't really take it as a situation where I'm going to keep my nerves and my feelings in check. It didn't really wash across for me that way. It seemed like someone who knows that they've got a lot to lose, so they don't want to look stupid twice, because after the first fight, he looked completely stupid. Especially because Tony Bellew broke down exactly what was going to take place in the first fight. He said his body would break down, his body would betray him. If he doesn't take out Tony in the early rounds, that's it. Tony would, come on strong in the second half of the fight and completely blow him away, which in more ways than one actually did happen, because in round 6, straight on time, it happened. Boom. His Achilles popped, and that was it. Yes, it took 5 rounds to complete the mission. However, David Haye is still a dangerous puncher. So Tony had every right to be cautious. But looking at the second fight, I just feel like when you take in everything, the turnaround of the Achilles injury and the second bicep injury, It's just been it just kind of told me. That's why I didn't really believe. That's why I kind of disagree. All these injuries and that led up to the second fight, and the way he was so quiet and reserved in this fight had me to believe that, David Haye for sure probably thought I have a chance of losing this fight. Whereas in the first fight, he didn't foresee any way of losing that fight. But I kind of want to just kind of get into. I'll talk about Tony Bellew in a second because it was a magnificent performance, and I'll get into the fight. Actually, I'll start by talking about the fight, and then I'll go on to talk about David Haye. But in the second fight, it was a bit more or less the same as the first fight. Tony being cautious, a bit cagey. They, trade a couple bombs here and there. And a defining moment for me in that fight, which kind of goes back to what I was just saying earlier, where David kind of shows he knew. I think he was back down to reality in this fight, because that round where he hit Tony flush like 2-3 times, and Tony Bellew postures and throws his hands in the air like, is that all you really got? And David Haye, all he had to do, instead of being like, pissed and loading up, charging forward or trying to find an answer, he literally threw his hands up as well. And I'm thinking to myself, mate, why are you mirroring Tony Bellew? Tony Bellew's mugging you off. You can't throw your hands up and say, well, yeah, I did hit you and you did take it, so, so be it. It's almost at that moment for me, David Haye accepted his defeat. Like, I didn't understand, because this is someone that you said if you hit clean, you're breaking his jaw, you're rattling his brain. You know how David talked. He loves to talk a lot of fly talk. And then, in round 3, there was a sequence, leading up to the first knockdown where David Haye punches fresh air about 3 or 4 times. Bellew slips every single shot, counters with a right hand, and David gets on his bike. And I'm thinking, wait, hold on, he's hurt. He starts to road. He tries to backpedal. Tony cuts off the ring expertly, and delivered the first knockdown. And I remember thinking, whoa, this time there's no injury, so no one could take anything away from Bellew this time. It was a fantastic bit of boxing that allowed that opening to take place. And then there was a second knockdown, and I'm thinking, well, David Haye's actually completely finished here. Round 4, he does enough to survive, but still takes a beating in round 4. And round 5, and that was pretty much it. The left hook sent him to sleep. Flat. Usually if you get knocked on your stomach with your back pointing towards the lights, that is, one of the most humiliating knockouts or knockdowns you can get. Shortly after the fight was finished, but textbook, beautiful finish. And I remember being at the public work and speaking to Tony, and I said, literally, forget your power. The reason why you'll beat David is because you're smarter than him. And again, Tony Bellew's boxing IQ was on display. He just knows, with certain opponents, he just knows what he has to do to win and where he has to be to throw a shot to land. And then, as well as the brain, he's got some serious heart, like big heart, Tony has. And that's what won him the fight. And I kind of want to separately talk about each individual fight and where they go from now. And, before I even get into David Haye, because I want to start with David Haye. I mean, if you listen to our podcast, you would see that usually I'm very harsh on David. I haven't got time for him. It really, like, as a person, he just makes me sick. But I just kind of want to preference everything I'm going to say by saying any man that steps into that ring and laces up a pair of gloves and fights in front of thousands of people is a better man than I am. I would love to actually take on the challenge one day, but you can't sit there and talk out the side of your mouth, because those men that do these things have to sacrifice a lot and give a lot to actually put themselves in a position to even, fight. So my hat goes off to David, but I kind of want to explain, why David Haye's been vilified, because, there's a lot that goes into it. If you think back to his I think the prime of his career, where I think he was fighting on Santana Sports, and David Haye was selling at the O2. He was more or less one of the most popular, British boxer at the time. I don't think there was a more popular fighter. Maybe Ricky Hatton had some saying that, but David Haye was surely, definitely up there with a couple of the big names in boxing. I can't really, because a lot of stuff was going up in the week of talking about legacy, and if I'm honest, I sit back and I wouldn't say David Haye was an icon, but I can't take away his accolades. Obviously, in cruiserweight has never been historically a great division, but he's managed to unify the division in his early on his career, and went on to achieve great things. So you can't take away those accolades from him. You can't. However you feel about the opponents he fought, he still achieved it on paper. It goes down as British cruiserweight unified champion. So shortly after unifying division, beating Jean-Marc Mormac, he steps up. Monte Barrett, he wins against Monte Barrett, and then reasons known to man, I don't know. I actually need to go back properly and look as to why he was given an immediate, heavyweight title shot against Valuev. And even in that fight, nothing actually happens in that fight at all. If you go back and watch that fight, I think 2-3 rounds, but literally he walks around the ring, occasional jab, moving out the way. I think round 10 is the only bit of brilliance that we see where he leashes a devilish right hand that actually makes Valuev do the stanky leg. Can you imagine a 7-foot heavyweight dancing around the ring because he's trying to stand up? But, if you really break down that fight, nothing happens in that fight. Valuev wasn't really a great heavyweight champion, if we're being completely honest. But he becomes a heavyweight champion. He beats Ruiz after in the follow-up. And then the big one. So now I've kind of set the stage now. So I basically talked you through David Haye's prime. And at this point, he's basically got the UK on his side. People believe what he's going to say. He's calling out the Klitschko's and he's saying he's going to knock them out. Just like he said he was going to knock out Valuev and didn't. Actually walked around the ring for 12 rounds. We come to Wladimir Klitschko, and he talked himself into a fight. And I remember vividly, like, going back to that precise moment in history. I remember fully believing everything David said. Like, I'm going to knock him out. I'm going to beat him. I'm going to take the brothers. I'm going to have both of their heads in his stick. He wore the top with the heads in their stick. And literally, the world, when I say the world, I mean the UK backed him. Sky Sports got in there, done pay-per-view, and everybody was hanging on to his every single word. He said he's had an amazing camp. He's ready to, throw down, and he's ready to dethrone Klitschko. He's going to knock him out in round 7, and he was talking, even in some of the press appearances, which is kind of deterring, but even a couple of the press appearances he made in a couple of TV shows, he was talking about making people earn their, his autograph and making people do 50 push-ups and 100 sit-ups and this and that. And I'm just thinking, whoa, I didn't really know you was this much of a dick. Pardon my French. But at that point, I was starting to get turned off. But because, the country itself was behind David Haye, being a world heavyweight British champion, which we hadn't had for some time, if I'm not mistaken, since Lennox Lewis. I don't think we had another British heavyweight champion. So you can already see why the cachet was at an all-time high and why it was in the pedestal. But when you actually take in the performance that David Haye put forth against Klitschko, which many fighters go on to say that, you ruined box office for English fighters all over the land, is one of the reasons why they hate David. the way he sold everybody a dream, and I bought 5 to 7, 8 versions of that dream. Like I was completely invested in that dream, and you gave nothing. And to top it off, you blame your toe. That was kind of the beginning of end of David, and that's why everyone. That's why he's been villain. That's why he's a villain in boxing. He may be like one of the best people you may meet personally, when to his loved ones and so forth. But for that alone, it was enough to be like, you know what, David, screw you, because a lot of people put money. I remember I put money on round 7, 8, and 9, £20 each for great odds for David Haye to knock out Klitschko, because like I said, I invested in this dream. And I remember watching the fight in Angel and people completely just walking away after round 11, just walking away. It was so packed. People were queuing up literally from the middle of the road outside Slug and Letters to watch the fight. That's how much of a event it was. And he put forth nothing. I don't think there's anything credible David Haye actually did in that fight. And then to finish the fight and then say, yeah, my toe, I wasn't able to explode and rush in flushes like I was supposed to. It was just pathetic. And if you kind of look, then you can quickly talk about the Fury and the 2 missed fights, and then retiring and then coming back and boxing two. Listen, like I said in the top of the top of this take, I don't know. I respect every fighter, but I'm pretty sure if I trained or had a camp for six months solid, the 2 comeback fights he had on Channel Dave, fitting really, to them 2 fighters he fought, I could have probably beat them. And I'm not even a heavyweight. I'm not a heavyweight. I'm not 6 foot. I'm about 6'1", but I would literally have given them a rollicking, like a complete beatdown. And I say that with the zero amount of ignorance and zero amount of arrogance. I truly believe I probably would have beat them. If you're knocking down people down with a jab, they shouldn't be in the ring. Full stop. And this just further played into the hands of, this guy's a complete fraud. And that's where the fraudulent claim of or to David Haye's, what persona or public appearance starts from that Klitschko fight. He was completely exposed, and since a lot of people haven't let him live for that, because after, he was a complete fraud. And then to go fight them 2 fighters and then call out the biggest name in boxing right now, I would say, after probably or a lot, along with Triple G and Canelo, to call out Anthony Joshua, you're further setting yourself up for people to not like you. So again, this is why he's played into that image of being the villain. Like, no one likes him and talks too much, because the way he talks up himself, he truly believes he can cause Joshua a problem. Like, can you imagine if that was David Haye and Anthony Joshua in the ring, and his Achilles gave way and Joshua had basically free reign to hit him? I mean, we could be having a completely different conversation now. Like, I want people to really soak that up. If David Haye actually got into the ring with his body betraying him like that, and Anthony Joshua could punch him around the ring, it would have been a huge problem. I mean, Matchroom don't really want that type of problems on their hands. So this is why David Haye is not liked, and this is why David Haye is a fraud, and this is why I've never had time for him, because I see through his silly beliefs and silly trash talking, because it's a marketing ploy, and good on him, it's worked. He's earned him a shitloads of money. I really truly hope he doesn't fight again, because with David, another problem with David as well is the fact that he's relied heavily on his physical attributes, his speed, his power, his timing, and his movement. Once you get to a certain age in any sport, in any discipline, if you haven't trained your mind or don't have the technique, you cannot you cannot exist in the sport, in any sport. Your body catch up father time is undefeated, like they say. I think my colleague O even said the same thing. He just, I think at a certain point, he just stopped learning how to box. And this is the thing about education or learning any discipline or learning anything in life. You don't stop learning. The moment you stop learning is the day you start to fail. And this is a fact. Take this as a life lesson. I mean, I don't mean to get so spiritual on you, but I feel like he didn't learn anything more about his body or learn how to adapt his attributes to favour him technically. And this is why it's caught up to him and his body's had completely shambolic response to him trying to compete. Because everything he's doing is training to be explosive. You're not going to be as explosive as you was when you was 25, when you're 37. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you could even look at people like Nadal. Yes, Nadal is still competing at a very high level, but because his style was such a overpowering style, because he does have he does have some crazy technique, but because a lot of his style was overpowering, his body caught up and injuries started to happen, and his game was suffered for that. And boxing is probably one of the worst sports you could rely on. I mean, look at Mayweather. Mayweather is so technically sound, he's able to probably still trouble a young, fresh, in their prime 28-year-old at 45 because he's so technically gifted. And that, bringing up Mayweather, the reason why, again, David Haye isn't liked by the public and isn't liked by people like me is because once you get to the point through trash talking and belittling your opponents and anyone has a chance to say, gotcha, there you go. You give people a reason to say that. That's it. There's no turning back. Bronner's going through the same thing now. He talked up being the heir apparent to Mayweather and XYZ, and he's lost 4 times now. And he lost about 3-4 times now, and that's it. Finished. Nobody ever has time for him. Yes, he's still a big draw, but people usually go there to probably see him get knocked out. And this is like David. David has refused to retire, but I really hope he does retire because all these things that I'm breaking down for you are reasons why he should step away from the ring. But knowing David, he'd probably try and get a fight with David Price, which again, it's not a pay-per-view fight. And where does that fight actually take place? On Dave TV, under the Haymaker banner, or does Matchroom put it on for it? Put it on like because it's as a headlining show. He still has quite a lot of fans, so you'd probably be able to sell a few tickets for the O2 or for somewhere the Copper Box Arena or so forth. Because, at least in that fight, there is, win or retire type. It's a bit like Shawn Michaels and Undertaker. If I win, you retire. If you lose, it's just one of them fights you can't lose. So I guess in that case, it's a bit fun to watch, but at the same time, who really has the time? And if you're David Haye, would you really want to go out in a fight, possibly knowing that you could lose to David Price, who is, for me, probably one of Britain's biggest disappointments in boxing? But, David Haye should retire. I think that's the only way he should go. There isn't a lot of fights out there for him in that heavyweight division that he can, it would just literally become a situation where he becomes a journeyman. I don't think, even with me questioning this whole legacy talk, because if you look back at the opponents and the caliber of opponents he fought, you would have to question that legacy. I think maybe because of accolades alone, you probably have to give him the edge. But for me, I'm not really buying into it because anytime David Haye's had to step up, he's crumbled. He's absolutely crumbled. So that's enough from my take on David. I felt like I'll be really fair with him. I'm not going to sit here and slag him off. I wanted to give a balanced breakdown on what I truly believe David Haye should do. And I just want to round off with, where Tony Bellew goes next, because you kind of shut people up twice now. And you've earned probably the most money in your career in the last 2 fights than you probably did in your whole career. So you're used to seeing a certain figure now. But there isn't a fight out there in cruiserweight that earns him that gives him that figure, because he's still not a massive, massive name. Forgive me or correct me if I'm wrong. After the 2 fights, he's probably earned a couple more fans, but enough fans to sell out Goodison Park, I don't know. Andre Ward, I wouldn't even bother going there because Andre Ward beats Bellew every day that ends with a Y. I think he gives a good account of himself, but again, the money isn't even there for you to go there and take a schooling, because Andre Ward himself isn't a massive name in America, given that even though he's so gifted, but he doesn't earn crazy amounts of money either. So, especially with, with the everything that's come to forth and how he was crying to himself every night. And there's several times I've heard him say that he's hated training camp, he's hated everything about it. Could you really motivate yourself to put yourself or your body and your mind through all of that again for a payday that you're not really accustomed to anymore? Because you hated training camp to make, I think, roughly 2 mil he made. So imagine doing all of that all over again for like a couple 100,000. I don't think it's worth it. I wouldn't say completely walk away, but I think buy your time, enjoy, or try and get your mental state back into one piece. I think that's the next challenge he has to win. And Tony Bellew is someone who rises to the occasion, and he continues to break down any obstacle or any challenge that's put in front of him, apart from obviously the Adonis Stevenson. But he's had 3 back-to-back terrific wins. Makabu, hey. No, 4 actually, because BJ Flores, you have to throw in BJ Flores in there as well. So I wouldn't want Bellew to kind of walk away on a loss. I don't feel like there's a fight out there for him at this moment of time. I'm even completely dismissing the Tyson Fury fight because, again, there's too much that politics there. And yes, it's a big money fight. It's probably the big money fight that he can get up to. But at the same time, I don't think Fury even wants to fight Bellew right now. And by the time, if Fury has 4 free fights under his belt and they get in the ring, it's no contest. Fury beats Bellew. I think it'll be a great dust up. He does make a shitload of money. It probably does sell out an arena or a stadium somewhere, because them two together would promote the fight to be probably one of the biggest British fights this year, or even in record history. It will go down as something to definitely watch for sure. But again, I just don't see that fight really coming to fruition. So yeah, that's my final take, man. Would love to see Bellew just kind of find himself, find love within his life again, and deal with the loss, and go through every emotions he's going through, rather than getting into the ring to kind of forget about everything he's dealing with outside the ring and not really get the payday he deserves, because he's now somewhat of a star. But even though it doesn't translate to figures, but he is a star, I think he can walk away graciously from the sport, achieving great stuff. As for David Haye, I'd definitely love to see him retire. Please apologise to Anthony Joshua for ever attempting to call him out. Stuff like that. This is what I'm saying. Stuff like that. If you listen to our old podcast, I went completely berserk, because I was like, how dare you call out Anthony Joshua after fighting those 2 bums? But again, I've already said that. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I hope you did enjoy this take. Please follow BSP Podcast on all platforms. I mean, we're looking to do some great things this year and continue to elevate. So please stay locked in and listen out for more takes and like this in future. Peace out.